You wake up and the alarm goes off. You lie there. You know you should move. You tell yourself, just sit up. That's all. Just sit up. But your body feels like it's filled with concrete. Your limbs are heavy. Your chest is tight. Not like a heart attack, just this dull, relentless pressure that was there when you fell asleep and is still there now. You shower, you get dressed. To everyone around you, this looks completely normal. No one can see what's happening inside. They see you smiling at a meeting, answering messages, eating lunch, but what they don't see is that you are running on nothing. That every simple task, like replying a text or deciding what to have for breakfast, costs you something. And by the evening time, you are so exhausted, not from doing, but from existing, that you want to disappear into the wall. And the worst part, you keep telling yourself, it's your fault. You should be grateful. You have a job, you have a family, a roof over your head. People have it worse. What right do you have to feel this way? Actually, this voice is not truth. It's not the truth. The voice is the illness talking to you. If any of this sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself or someone you love in these words, then this episode is for you. I'm Dr. Shokry Alemam, a consultant psychiatrist, and today we're going to sit with depression honestly, not as a buzzword, not as a trend, not as a weakness of character, but as what it actually is, a complex, real, treatable medical condition. Let me clear about something from the start. Feeling sad is a normal human experience. We all feel down after a loss, a disappointment, a difficult season. This is not what we are talking about today. Major depressive disorder, which is a clinical term as defined by the American Diagnostic Manual, which is DSM 5, and the World Health Organization Classification System ICD 11. They defined it as a persistent pattern of symptoms lasting at least 2 weeks that represent a clear change from the person's previous functioning and that significantly impair the daily life. And to receive this diagnosis, the person must experience either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure in almost all activities. At least five of the following, in addition to what we have mentioned, like changes in sleep, either too much or too little, changes in appetite or weight, fatigue or loss of energy, difficulty in concentrating, feelings of worthlessness or excessive feeling of guilt, slowed thinking or movement, and in its most severe form, there are recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. Note here that this list includes the body, not just the mind. Depression is not just emotional. It disrupts sleep, appetite, energy, and physical movement. It disrupts the whole body. The ICD 11 also recently refined how we classify depressive episodes between single episode, recurrent depressive disorder, or persistent depressive disorder, which we call dysthymia, where a lower grade but chronic depression may last for years, and only qualified clinician can determine which of these applies. This episode educates, but a professional assessment is a must. So, what's happening inside the brain and mind? Actually, for a long time, we told people that depression was simply a low serotonin. It was a clean, simple, and unfortunately incomplete. The real picture is far more sophisticated than that. We now know that depression involves a network of brain systems, not a single chemical switch. So, the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of your brain responsible for planning, decision making, and emotional regulation, it becomes less active. And the amygdala, which is the brain alarm system, becomes overactive, keeping you in a persistent low grade state of threat. The third part, which is the hippocampus, which is central to memory and learning, it can actually shrink in people with prolonged depression. And the researchers show that this is partly reversible with treatment. So, what about serotonin? Actually, a landmark study in 2024 found that it's not the level of serotonin in depressed cells that differs, but how much is released. Depressed neural cells release significantly less serotonin, and this release capacity is linked to signaling molecule called mTOR. Actually, this is the paradigm shift. It tells us that the old chemical imbalance narrative that was too simple and that the mechanisms are more nuanced than we once thought. Also, we have something called hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is a system that governs our stress response. And in people with depression, this system often dysregulated, resulting in elevated cortisol levels that over time are toxic to the very brain regions that regulate mood. In addition, actually, to its effect on several and different body organs. Now let's talk about the mind. So, cognitively, depression produces what psychologists call the cognitive triad: negative thoughts, negative thoughts about self, I'm worthless, negative thoughts about the world, nothing ever goes right, and negative thoughts about the future, things will never improve. These are not just bad moods, they are persistent distortions in how the brain processes the reality. People with depression often ruminate. They circle the same painful thoughts repeatedly, unable to stop them, which in itself worsens the neurological state. So, depression is actually one of the most common mental health conditions on the planet. And according to the World Health Organization, approximately 280 million people worldwide live with depression, making it a leading cause of disability globally. In the MENA region, data particularly striking. Comprehensively, a study published in a peer-reviewed journal found that the prevalence and incidence of depressive disorder in the MENA region is higher than the global average. Survey by Arab Barometer found that approximately 3 in 10 people across the Arab world, about 29%, report suffering from depression. And in certain countries, this percentage rises to 40 and 43%, which is actually huge. Depression affects women at roughly twice the rate of men. Actually, this gap may partly reflect the underreporting among men. In many cultures, men are less likely to seek help or acknowledge emotional pain. It can begin at any age, but the peak onset is typically in the mid 20s. However, recently, the adolescent depression is rising globally at an alarming rate. Depression doesn't discriminate. It affects doctors, engineers, mothers, students, religious leaders, and those who appear by all external measures to be doing well. The World Health Organization estimates that depression is responsible for more years of life lived with disability than any other condition. So, what could be the causes and risk factors of depression? Depression is almost never a result of a single cause. It arises from of complex of interactions of biological, psychological, and social factors, which we call the biopsychosocial model. So, genetically, having a first degree relative with depression increases the risk, though it doesn't guarantee you will develop it. But depression is not a single gene. It involves multiple genetic variants that affects neurotransmitters and the system and the stress reactivity. Early life experiences, it plays an enormous role, especially childhood trauma, either abuse, neglect, loss, or witnessing violence. It profoundly shapes the developing brain stress response. So, children who grow up in emotionally unpredictable or invalidating environments are significantly at elevated risk for depression later in life. And what about the chronic stress? Actually, it's one of the most powerful environment triggers. So, job loss, relationship breakdown, grief, financial pressure, immigration stress, chronic physical illness, any of these can tip a biological, vulnerable person into a depressive episode. In the Arab world specifically, cultural pressures deserve attention. The expectations to suppress emotional pain, particularly in men, the stigma around mental health, family enmeshment, and the stress of navigating traditional and modern identities simultaneously are all risk amplifiers. Research has documented a significant link between shame proneness and the Arab culture and depression. Now we'll talk about sleep. So, sleep disruption, physical activity, poor nutrition, substance use, which we call here as lifestyle. These all can either trigger or worsen depressive episodes. And the relationship is bidirectional. Depression worsens lifestyle, and poor lifestyle deepens depression, especially the sleep. Sleep disruption can be considered as one of the most eminent symptoms of depression, and also it can be one of the strong triggering factor to develop depressive episode. So, in our clinics, we listen to our clients and patients talking about some information they knew about depression, which we can consider some of them as myth. So, the first myth here is depression is a sign of weakness or lack of faith. However, the fact is, depression is a medical condition with well documented neurobiological underpinnings, it has nothing to do with strength of character or depth of someone's spirituality. Studies show that deeply religious, devout individuals are as vulnerable to depression as anyone else. Faith can be a source of support, but it doesn't protect against illness. And seeking doctor is itself consistent with the prophetic tradition of seeking the treatment. Another myth says you just need to think positive, exercise more, and push through it. Actually, the fact that for clinical depression, the willpower alone is insufficient. You wouldn't tell someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. Depression involves measurable changes in the brain function that requires appropriate intervention. Lifestyle factors help and are part of the treatment, but they can't substitute for professional care in moderate to severe cases. Another myth, the antidepressants are addictive and will change your personality. But the fact says that standard antidepressants like SSRIs or SNRIs are not addictive in the clinical sense. They don't cause craving or tolerance. They require gradual tapering when discontinuing, but this is a physiological adjustment, not addiction. And most people report that medication helps them feel like themselves again, not different. Another myth says that depression always looks like crying and staying in bed, but the fact is completely different because many people with severe depression continue to function, hold jobs, and appear fine publicly. This is called high functioning depression. The suffering is invisible, which is like very harsh because people suffers inside, but no one can see. And the last myth with us today. If you talk about suicide with someone who is depressed, you will plant the idea. Actually, the researchers consistently showed the opposite. Asking openly about suicide thoughts reduces the risk, opens dialogue, and can save lives. Now, we'll move to the part of treatment and management. After knowing all of this about depression, how can we deal with this? How can we manage it? And the good news, and I mean this clinically, not just reassurance, that depression is one of the most treatable conditions in psychiatry. And the majority of people who receive appropriate, evidence based treatment improve significantly. Psychotherapy is a cornerstone treatment, especially the cognitive behavioral therapy, or what we call CBT. It has the strongest evidence base and works to identify and restructure the distorted thoughts pattern that fuel depression. And the behavior activation, which is part of the CBT, it helps patients to re-engage with meaningful activities even when motivation is absent, because action precedes motivation in depression, not the other way around. Other effective modalities include interpersonal therapy, which focuses on the relationship patterns and grief, acceptance and commitment therapy, which helps patients to build a psychological flexibility, and the psychodynamic therapy, which explores how early experience shape current emotional patterns. And of course, every case detect the suitable therapy that we can use with them. And when it comes to the medications, actually, medications are indicated for moderate to severe depression as an adjunct to therapy, not a solo treatment. And our first line pharmacological treatment here are the SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and SNRIs, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. And these medications take 2 to 4 weeks to begin working. So patients often need to be supported through that waiting period. Fear of medication is understandable, but the evidence is clear. And for people with moderate to severe depression, medications combined with therapy produces the best outcomes. It always tells the truth, the improvement that we see always tell the truth. I always tell my patients that these medications don't make you numb. They make the floor higher, so you have a platform from which the therapy can actually do its work. Now we'll move to the lifestyle medicine, which is not optional. It's part of the treatment. So regular aerobic exercise has been shown in multiple randomized controlled trials to reduce depressive symptoms comparably to antidepressant in mild to moderate cases. Sleep hygiene is critical, and we have discussed that sleep disruption is both a symptom and driver of depression. Nutritional approach emphasizes omega-3 fatty acids, whole foods, gut health is increasingly supported by evidence linking the gut-brain axis to mood regulation. So we have to focus on this. We have to be aware of this. And we live in families, we live in society. So the family and social support matters enormously. Isolation actually deepens depression. Reconnecting, even in small, manageable steps, is therapeutic. And for families, the most important thing you can do is to listen without fixing, validate without dismissing, and encourage professional help without making pressure on them. And what doesn't help? Yeah, many people, they can make some actions or do some behaviors to help themselves, but actually it doesn't help. It may make it worse. So alcohol and self-medication, withdrawal from the society or social interaction are actually catastrophizing this condition. Moreover, actually, we can see that social media comparisons actually it's horrible. All the time, people who compare themselves with social media and social media models, they worsen their depression, or even it can trigger going into a depressive episode. Also, waiting for motivation to return before taking an action. In depression, we said that motivation follows the action, not the other way around. Okay, and after treatment, how can we prevent the relapse? Because relapse prevention is essential in depression. Depression recurs in many people. We have to admit this. Knowing your personal warning signs, maintaining protective routines, and staying connected to your treating team significantly reduces the risk of relapse. What are the latest research and emerging directions? Actually, we have now esketamine, which is a nasal spray form of ketamine. It received the FDA approval for treatment resistant depression. However, we have to know that it has certain precautions, certain protocols, and it doesn't mean that it's working for treatment resistant depression, that it will work with everyone. Because some patients who have failed multiple antidepressant, they will go directly to ask for esketamine. But who will decide it will be good for you or not, it will work for you or not, is your treating psychiatrist. Also, we have researches for the transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is the TMS, has advanced significantly that the latest deep TMS protocols shows response rate of 67% in the treatment-resistant cases. And in a landmark study published early 2026, 5 days accelerated TMS protocol was shown to produce depression score reductions of 36%. Wow, 36% in 5 days, with effects continuing to improve 2 to 4 weeks after the final session. And this is the most interesting part in this study, because this is extraordinary. The idea to have 5-day treatment could produce effect that continue to develop over weeks afterwards. It's very promising, and hopefully to have more larger studies to support this. Also, these days we have psilocybin assisted therapy. It remains in the clinical trials, and it has shown remarkably preliminary results, but I would say it's controversial. So it's still too early to consider this right now. We need more time, more studies to be sure that it will help our patients, not to harm them. Also, there is a biomarker research which is increasingly enabling personalized medicine. So, genetic profiling is beginning to help clinicians to match patients to the medications most likely to work for them, reducing the trial and error process that has historically frustrated both the patients and clinicians. But again, we cannot say that this works for everyone, but it gives us hope that there are some promising changes in the future we can depend on to decrease the duration of the trial and error in our treatment plan. I want to close by saying something, I mean it. But as a something I have witnessed across thousands of clinical hours, I have sat with people in their most complete darkness, people who could not get out of bed, who had lost faith in everything, including themselves, who believed with absolute certainty that they would never feel better. And I have watched, not in every case, but in the great majority, those same people recover, not a lesser version of themselves, but often to a more honest, more compassionate, a more self aware version than they were before. And this is why, because they have lost a lot during the depressive episode. And when they regained themselves again, they started to appreciate every single small detail in their lives, and they feel the importance of it. They feel the value of life. Depression lies to you. It tells you that the way things are right now is the way they will always be. It tells you that you are uniquely broken. It tells you that reaching out is a burden to others. None of that is true. Actually, depression is like a black cloud or black umbrella that covers your plane, hijack your thoughts, starts to drive the thoughts by itself. So most of the thoughts, negative thoughts coming to your mind during depression are actually lies. It's not your thoughts, it's the voice of the illness. Actually, seeking help is not a weakness. It is the hardest and bravest, most self respecting thing any person can do in the middle of depressive episode. It takes more courage to make that appointment than it doesn't. So, making a decision to help yourself is actually a very brave decision. If you are listening to this and you recognize yourself, please reach out to a mental health professional. If you are listening to this and you recognize someone you love, be gentle, be patient, and encourage them towards professional support. And finally, share this episode because the person in your life who needs it most is probably not the person who will ask for it. I'm Dr. Shokry Alemam, and thank you for being here with me in discussing depression. And wait for us for the future episodes about other mental health problem in the future. Thank you.